Welcome back to Close Up. We continue our conversation with Senator Jeanne Shaheen today, and we do want to talk about the war in Ukraine. We are nearing the one-year anniversary of the beginning of the war. The U.S. just announced that we're going to be sending Abrams tanks to Ukraine, following along with Germany, who is doing the same. The day after that was announced, they faced severe attacks from Russia there in Ukraine. Asking about the tanks, do you stand by that decision to give the tanks to Ukraine?
Absolutely. I think we've got to do everything we can to support Ukraine in this unprovoked war against Russia. And, you know, what really resonated with me, I had a chance to meet with some women in the Ukrainian military earlier late last year. And one of the things one woman said to me really made sense. She said, you know, we are here to ask you to give us the weapons we need to win this war so that we can fight the Russians so you don't have to. And I think that put it very succinctly. Vladimir Putin's not going to stop here. We saw his incursion into the country of Georgia back in 2008. That was followed by taking Crimea in 2014. The West did nothing on either of those incursions when he went into those countries, and now he's got a full-blown war in Ukraine that he is the only one who wants. And the fact that we have millions of Ukrainians who are suffering because of that effort is just so horrific, and they have been so courageous. We need to do everything we can to support them. And in talking to some of our allies, both in NATO and in Eastern Europe, they are very worried about what happens if Putin is successful in Ukraine. Does he come after the Baltic states next? Does he go into Poland next? Does he go into Slovakia or Moldova? There is great concern, and that's why the West and NATO have been so strong in supporting Ukraine, because the countries of Europe understand what's at risk here if Vladimir Putin is able to get away with this unprovoked war of aggression.
Are we doing enough? I know that they want to have jets as well, and they're asking for that. Are we doing enough?
Well, Erin, I think we should do more. I think we should provide all of the weapons that the Ukrainians are able to use effectively. One of the critical issues around the tanks has been concern that Russia is planning an offensive as soon as winter ends, and the Ukrainians want to be prepared to respond to that and have plans in place so that they are able to address what Russia is planning. We're sending a battalion of Abrams tanks, 31 of those. Both Britain and Germany are sending tanks, and a number of other countries in Europe that have the Leopard tanks from Germany are also sending those tanks. So I don't think we're going to get to the 300 that Ukraine says they would like to have before this offensive in the spring, but hopefully we'll get a good way toward that and be able to help the Ukrainians in this fight.
I want to talk about here at home in New Hampshire, and I know you've been touring around and talking about your Invest in New Hampshire project, and part of your tour was stopping in at organizations that help those with addiction and treatment services. What have you seen that is working?
You know, we were making some real progress, I thought, on addressing the opioid epidemic before COVID. And sadly, because of the isolation, because of the need for people to stay at home, the challenges during COVID have gotten worse. But what works is people cooperating and coordinating together. I was over at Reality Check, which is a recovery center over in Jaffrey, and they were talking about what they're doing. I met with one man who talked about his substance misuse and said that he got a call from Reality Check from the woman who's the director there, and she said, "I'm going to see you tomorrow night at your house." And he said they came in and they talked about what they were going to do to help me in my misuse of alcohol, and so they have, he said, that's more than anyone had ever done for me. So that kind of direct intervention, person to person, is really important, and we need to continue to provide the resources that it's going to take. Because while we have seen, I don't want to say decline, because the numbers from Manchester and Nashua, at least for last year, had increased, but we have seen from the worst years some stability in the number of overdose deaths. The reality is that's mostly because we've gotten very good at using Narcan and helping people to recover when they overdose. But what we've got to do is address prevention. We've got to help educate young people and everybody, and we've got to address the fentanyl that's coming into the country, because that is what is so deadly and is taking lives. I was pleased that I worked with John Cornyn from Texas and Rob Portman from Ohio, and we got some legislation passed in the last Congress to address fentanyl interdiction and to help those law enforcement in countries where fentanyl is coming from to look out for that and to keep it from coming into the United States. But it's a huge challenge, and we've got to do more.
I know homelessness has become a huge issue. You're aware of that. Yes. Here in the state of New Hampshire, and I know that you introduced a bill to support local governments. And what will that do?
Well, what we've got to do is, again, provide resources, but the fundamental problem here is not just the opioid epidemic and the fact that we have people with mental illness and substance misuse who are homeless, but it is that we don't have enough housing stock. Everywhere I've been in New Hampshire, they talk about the need to have more affordable housing so that people can stay in their homes. And so we've got to do more to address that. One of the areas that New Hampshire has been very successful at is resident-owned mobile home parks. And we need to provide additional support for them to be able to continue to keep big developers from coming in, buying up those parks, raising the rents, and putting people out in ways that mean they no longer have housing.
We just passed the 50th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. It's been 7 months since it was overturned. What are your thoughts moving forward? What are your concerns? And do you think that is there talk in Washington about codifying that, the right of a woman's right to choose?
You know, control of our own reproductive health, of when and if to have a child, is the most personal and basic decision that a woman and families make. And that should not be made by some politician in Concord or some politician in Washington, or those people who have no idea what the circumstances of the woman and family are. That should be made by women and families in consultation with their doctor, with their minister, with whoever they talk to for counsel. I remember what it was like in this country the last time before Roe v. Wade, so the last time we had outlawed abortion, and the threat that that presented to so many women who had no options and were desperate. And it's particularly challenging for women who live in parts of this country who don't have any resources, who are not able to access health care when they need it. I talked to Planned Parenthood earlier this year after the Dobbs decision, and they said they were getting calls from people all over the country. So yes, I think we need to go back and try and get this changed in Congress. Right now we don't have the votes to do that, but this is a decision that should not be made by government. It should be made by families, and government doesn't know the circumstances that women are in.
I want to talk to you about the session ahead, and Democrats are in control in the Senate, not in the House. What is your hope for this session? What are you hoping to get accomplished?
Well, one of the things that I really want to continue to focus on is making sure that people have access to health care when they need it. We just, we're about to finish the open enrollment in the Affordable Health Care Plan, and we have a record number of people who have signed up for that, and I think it's in large part because they're able to get help with the cost of that health care. It's something that I've worked on. I was really pleased to see that my efforts to expand the subsidies for people so that it was more affordable got included in some legislation in the last Congress, and we're going to continue to work on that. We've just reintroduced that legislation to extend it again to help people. As part of that, I hope we can continue to work on insulin costs for people with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. Right now, too many people are not able to afford the cost of insulin, and diabetes is the most expensive chronic illness we have in this country, and obviously I have a personal connection to that because I have a granddaughter with type 1. But we've got to make sure that people can get the medication they need to stay alive, and that's what reducing the cost of insulin is about. We took a big step in the last session of Congress at capping out-of-pocket costs at $35, but we've got to do more because that was only for people on Medicare, and we need to make sure that people of all ages can get the help they need.
All right, Senator, thank you so much.
Thank you
for being with us
nice
today.
To be here.